Welcome, I'm Donald Cannon. I'm going to discuss one of my favorite topics with you, Великий могучий английский язык. Today is your birthday, and you want to buy something special. You want to buy yourself a new computer. So we go off to the stores, walk around the mall for 2 hours, and finally we come to the big super discount store that everybody uses, pk.ru. There we see in their window a big advertisement for a special sale. День рождения sale, super offer special promo, one-time спецпредложение. So, if it's your birthday, you get 20,000 rubles off a special IPK super duper computer, which is exactly what you want. But there's only one available each day. So we rush into the store and we find out that that computer for today hasn't been snapped up yet. So you find the sales clerk, you show him your passport with your birthday, and you tell him you want to buy the super duper spец день рождения предложение. So he rings up the sale, you whip out your Sberbank card, and he says, our computer is down. You have to pay in cash. So you dig into your pockets and you find 35,000 rubles. You need another 25,000. You turn to me and you ask, how many monies do you have? How much money? How much monies? You've forgotten that in Russian, деньги is plural, but in English, it's singular. This is a mistake that lots of Russian speakers make. So we're going to talk about countable and uncountable words in English today. Not all of them, because we've got a lot of them. We're only going to talk about those that most Russian speakers get wrong most often. So let's start with my favorite, gooseberries, крыжовник. How would you say in Russian, he got sick after he ate 3 gooseberries? Он заболел после того, как он съел 3 крыжовника. 3 крыжовника. Now, it doesn't work in Russian. In English, we can count gooseberries as much as we want. In Russian, крыжовник is just крыжовник, whether we have 1 or 1,000. Крыжовник in Russian is like money in English. It's uncountable. English is probably the only language in the world where you don't count your money. Let's take this situation. John has a lot of knowledge and information, and he gave me a good piece of advice recently. He did some research and found out that the money I invested with my brokers is at risk. Now, we've got 5 major nouns in there, 4 of which can be plural in Russian, but have to be singular in English. We can say знания, советы, исследования, and деньги. Деньги is always plural in Russian, but they're all singular in English. The other one, information, I don't know why, but a lot of Russian speakers like to talk about informations. I don't know why that comes in, but don't do it. The Brits like to speak about researches, but we won't even think about that. Okay, what if you want to say something like, он дал мне один очень хороший совет? You can say it only this way. He gave me a good piece of advice. Let's take 3 other common nouns, equipment, hair, and work. Our office recently bought a lot of new equipment. Not equipments, equipment, always singular. Let's say you just got out of the shower and you want to say in English, у меня волосы еще мокрые. How would you say it? My hairs are all wet? Well, hairs are different than hair. Totally different words. If you talk about works, you mean something like the works of Shakespeare. He read all of the works of Shakespeare. Он читал все труды Шекспира. If you want to talk about just one piece of work, we don't say it that way, you have to come up with a new word. So think of job. Job, jobs. I have a lot of jobs at work. Jobs plural, work singular. That brings us to my favorite 3. Watch and clock, news, and sports. Now, of course, you can have 2 watches or 1 watch, or you can have 2 clocks or 1 clock in the kitchen. It's not singular or plural. It's the fact that in Russian, часы is always plural. So, if you want to say мои часы спешат на 5 минут, you have to say my watch is 5 minutes fast. А на кухне часы опаздывают на 10 minut. And in the kitchen, the clock is 10 minutes slow. News, новости, is always, at least in Russian, новости is always plural. News in English sounds plural, but it's always used as singular. So, the news about the plane crash is horrible. What happens if you want to say something like, а я услышал очень интересную новость сегодня? You have to treat it the same way you treated advice. I heard a very interesting piece of news today. And lastly, we come to sports. Sports is going to show us how countables in English are different than countables in Russian. And with sports in English, we immediately come up with two problems. First, the British talk about sport, not sports, but sport, just like sport in Russian. Americans talk about sports, and it's a singular verb. John is an athlete. Sports is his main interest in life. So how would that sound in Russian? Спорты, спорты, спорты – это его главный интерес в жизни? Doesn't make sense. Our second problem comes in that we use sports in English in the singular only when we're talking about sport вообще, just like in the example I gave you. Sports is his major interest in life. If you're talking about the individual kinds of sports, however, football, soccer, volleyball, basketball, then you use sports as plural. Sports play a major role in his life. Спорты играют большую роль в его жизни. Doesn't make sense. And there's a third thing that makes it even worse. If you use sport in American English, it means something like молодчина. He's a good sport even when he loses. Он просто молодчина, когда проигрывает. So, how do English and Russian differ in how they treat countables and uncountables? In Russian, once a word is uncountable, it's always uncountable. Крыжовник, спорт, одежда. You can't say крыжовники, спорты, красивые одежды. It doesn't work. But in English, it's singular or plural according to the meaning you put into it. Russians always learn that fruit is singular, except that in a few cases it might be plural. I've had lots of native Russian teachers of English come to me and ask, when do we use fruits as plural? And they always give the example of how many fruits are on this plate. Now somewhere, somehow, someone has taught them to differentiate between fruit and fruits, but they can never get it right. My answer to them always is, I'd never say it that way. I would say, how many pieces of fruit are on the plate? If you always use fruit singular, you'll always be correct. The problem is that these Russian teachers have taken an English grammar and stuffed it into a Russian mold. And it's never right, as I'll show you in a couple of minutes. You'll often see fruits and vegetables printed on boxes that growers use to ship their produce. But the people who designed these boxes didn't know that fruits is not used in plural in English. They're not native speakers of English. Now let's say you just came home from the open-air market. It's high summer, there's lots of produce in the stalls, and your husband or your wife asks you, «А сколько ты увидел сегодня на рынке фруктов?» How would you say that in English? Maybe something like, how many fruits did you see at the market today? If you say it that way, here's what you've just said. «А сколько ты увидел сегодня на рынке гомиков?» Unfortunately, fruits in English means homosexual man, and it has that same nasty, ugly quality that gomiki has in Russian. So the moral of the story is, be careful with your countables and your uncountables. Next video, we'll talk about many and much, because those are the quantifiers that go with the countables and the uncountables, so that you say how much fruit and not how many fruits. For today, thanks for listening.